Hari Om. It is Sunday morning, and as is our predilection at SRV ashrams here in Hawaii on this particular occasion, we like to start off with meditation and then go into our satsang in the morning, and also then this afternoon our live streaming class on Buddhism and Vedanta, which would be the beginning class of a 3-series class. So we have gathered here, the few of us who meditated this morning early at 6, and we have a few viewers on our live streaming audience who are also hopefully going to participate with some questions. So we will enter into what's called satsang. Sat is truth, and sangha means a group of people who are seeking truth. And as we know by various teachers and teachings that we've received, satsanga proceeds by atmavichara, or by answering the question, trying to answer the question, who am I? It might be a sort of Advaita Vedantic Zen koan, if you will. Best to ask who rather than what, where, when, and why of the 5 W's, as we say, because that cuts straight to the essence of the matter. Whether you want to call it the who that is the ego or the who that is the true self, one finds out the distinction between the real and the unreal that way, and that's Vedanta's main premise. As we were saying before this satsang started this morning in a little conversation, spiritual life should be a matter of ease and clarity from the beginning. One shouldn't have to seek for the spiritual path. One should be born with it, and then one should just practice it. And walking along the path, one will meet God at every turn. No matter what one sees or does, God is there in that form. Otherwise, with all that confusion in our mind, or questions about seeking, or what, where, when, why, as we just said, then we have these problems. We don't even know that we're on the path sometimes, even though we are. Or put another way, we don't even know that we're always in Brahman, and we're always trying to seek Brahman, and Brahman is in us. Kingdom of heaven is within us, as they say. So with those opening words, I will invite questions, so we'll get right to the satsang part of the day. So we'll start with a question from our Sangha member here.
Good morning, Babaji.
Good morning.
A question, I'm trying to find the right way to formulate this, but when we, in our Gita study the other day, we were focusing on this verse from the Gita, chapter 7, verse 5. This is my lower prakriti, but different from it, know, O mighty armed, my higher prakriti, the principle of intelligence or consciousness by which this manifested universe is sustained. And in the next verse, he goes on again and says, know that these 2 higher prakritis are the womb of all things. So a discussion ensued, about the way that Sri Krishna is using the word prakriti, seemingly to refer to something that's not prakriti at all, but pure consciousness. And so we had a very interesting discussion on this, but it would be really nice to hear you illuminate this further.
So the question, to bring it to the live streaming audience with more volume, is that this chapter 7 sloka came up in their conversation recently, and it has to do with that 3-part sloka, really, that Krishna mentions his lower prakriti, his lower nature, is higher prakriti, and then his supreme soul, his supreme self. So lower prakriti means nature, basically pure astika body is what he calls that in the Gita. 8-fold body, pure astika. Astika means 8, of course, like the astika, asta, margika, and so forth. The asta siddhis and the 8 limbs also. So we know that Sanskrit word astika means 8. So eightfold means mind, intelligence, ego, and the 5 senses. So he calls that lower prakriti because it's an admixture of things, but it's mostly nature. So therefore it's, as Swami Nikhilananda's commentary says, it's impure and dangerous. So one wants to move carefully amongst the lower nature. Then he talks about his higher nature being intelligence and so forth, is what the commentary said. So that is, of course, the womb of all beings, because nature, womb here would have to be the word in question, means nature can't really act by itself. See, it's insentient. And every teaching from Samkhya onward has made that point. There's no real mystery about nature. It's, once one sees it, one sees basically everything from its insentient nature to its emptiness, a whole gamut of things in between too about nature that are extremely material. And of course, with the senses, the 5 senses concentrating on nature, then it becomes bound. It's a source of bondage. So nature is a source of samsara, which is also in Swami Nikhilananda's commentary. So one then must develop an ability to withdraw from nature and observe it, and ask, who am I? When you ask, who am I, then of course you'll find out right away you're not the 5 elements of which nature is made. So when we say the 5 senses and mind and ego and intelligence, the pure astic body, then it infers rather the 5 elements of air, earth, fire, water, and ether. And all of those too, insentient principles, one comes out of the other. That's why you meditate in reverse fashion. From you connect earth to smell, and water to taste, and fire to sight, and air to touch, and ether to hearing. And so that's meditating those 5 gross elements into the 5 senses, and the 5 senses then go back into the 5 subtle senses, and by marches of 5, quintuplication process it's called, you take these back into yourself. And along the way, Vedantic style anyway, yogic style is a little different. Vedantic style is that you merge them back into each other and ask the question, am I any of these? Sort of the who am I question. So you're always discriminating, viveka, the first rule of thumb in Vedanta. You are always discriminating between the real and the unreal. The unreal never is, the real never ceases to be. The truth about both has been known by the seers. Krishna says that in the Gita too. So the unreal never is, the real never ceases to be. You're always looking for that reality that's behind insentient principles or appearances or maya or samsara. And that's your search for truth. And if you've lost truth to begin with, which I said was not a good idea if you ever did, the truth is the only foundation. So one must maintain that at all times. If thine eye be single, thou shalt know the truth. So you should retain that single eye no matter where your soul might venture, whether it ventures outward into the lowest of the triputis, or that is physical earth, or if it goes into the subtler of the triputis, that's the inner world of the intelligence, and then it goes to the supreme triputi, that is the Brahman itself, or Atma Brahma. So that's what Krishna is talking about there, is one of the 3 great triputis to meditate upon, his exterior body, and then his interior body, and then his transcendent body, if you could call the third a body. So back to the idea then that caused the discussion, when it says the womb of matter, or the womb, I think you said, right? Then, of course, nature is insentient, so it can't really cause anything to be born. So it's intelligence itself that is looking out, as it were, and we'll have teachings on that at 2:30 today about conscious rebirth. So there's something there in the form of intelligence or a shining being, a deva or a devi, a shining being inside of you, devatma shaktim, if you want to call it that way, as Svetashvatara Upanishad calls it, that is looking on the process of birth and life and death. It's your witness consciousness, and it witnesses all phenomena, sakshi bhutam, it witnesses all phenomena in nature. So right away when you have these Sanskrit teachings and these Sanskrit words, it immediately infers very directly that there's an observer to all these things, and that observer is, if you examine it, is made of pure intelligence, pure consciousness, timeless, deathless awareness, beyond the formation of the Purastika body, eightfold body, which took place much later. Mundaka Upanishad says, anterior to both life and mind is this Atman. So before, anterior means before life and mind even happened, then there was this Atman, you see, looking on. It's the intelligence of that Atman which causes things to be born. And that is, your own intelligence has fashioned a body out of those 8 things: mind, ego, and intellect. Difference between intellect and intelligence should be noted there, so you don't confuse the two. Intelligence is a flow of consciousness. It's a sheen off of Om. It's rays, wisdom rays. And intellect is a container for those. So the mind, intellect, ego, sheath. We know Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Kosha, right? Those are the 3 highest of the sheaths. And then Pranamaya Kosha and Annamaya Kosha, the energy in the body, are the 2 lower ones. So these sheaths mean a container for something. Kosha is the word. Container for something. Or sometimes they call it an upadi, if they want to talk about the covering power. Something that covers, upadi. So whether you talk about it as kosha or upadi, it has a little different inference. Makes you still think Vedantically. Kosha means more tantrically, kind of. You say, oh yes, it's containing. God is in everything. It's being contained by these finite mechanisms. A portion of it got contained there. A little bit of the light shone in that dewdrop, you see. A little bit of the sun got captured. But when you talk about it being a sheath, a covering, upadi, then you're talking very Vedantically about everything being, all form being a covering over the formless reality. And you haven't seen the formless reality yet. You're just working your way through the coverings. See? So by sets of 5s, you do that until finally you come to the, actually the 5-fold mind, I call it, because you have mind, ego, intellect, and thoughts. In later delineation of that, there were a 4-fold mind. Krishna's talking about a 3-fold mind, Paravasta, when he is talking in the Gita like that. Purastika means 3-fold mind plus 5 senses. Later thinking was a 4-fold mind, Antakarna they called it. So you added thought in there with the mind, intellect, and ego. Now you had a more thorough composite of what the mental organ is about, you see, and what it's up to. Sri Ramakrishna said, this rascal, what it's up to, you see. But then if you added the cosmic mind to it, called Mahat, which is the first principle, then you have a 5-fold mind there too, don't you? So pretty much a march of 5 5s inward. And then might as well throw in the 5 pranas too, what Vivekananda calls the 1 prana in 5 forms. So you've got 25 things you're sitting there, you're looking at, you're witnessing. What a marvelous mechanism. What a marvelous many-tiered castle. See? Many realms in that land. And but it all had to be formulated and directed by one principle. And that principle would be intelligence. Sometimes intelligence is even equated with Brahman. Like, for instance, in Buddhism, Lord Buddha's name is intelligence. So Buddha nature is pure intelligence, Bodhi. So quite often it's very easy to equate pure intelligence with Brahman, or with the highest reality. So anyway, the idea is that sentiency is there, so that would make, it would find itself a nest, a womb of matter. The womb of matter itself isn't powerful enough, isn't sentient, doesn't have enough consciousness or wherewithal to formulate anything. It just is a tree, flower, and water producing machine that's almost put in motion by these inner organs. So you're going to have to look deeper within to find out who's doing the manifesting, who's doing the projecting, who's doing the incarnating, and who's doing who's withdrawing from incarnation. That who am I, in other words. And that you'll find in the third of that, Triputi, the highest Brahman, he says. Beyond both of these, he says in the Gita, is my supreme nature, Purushottama, the supreme being, or Brahman. That is my true self, he says. So, those are good slokas in the Gita. I remember my early days reading the Gita in my 20s. I pondered that a lot, and it was very, very good information to know. And putting it together with the Samkhya, the pure Astika body, the 24 cosmic principles and all that, gives you a foundation through which, if you know those, you will not be born in ignorance again. See, that's why they start off knowing the path. Whereas the rest of us are trying to seek for some path. Does God exist? Does God not exist? What a bunch of waste of time, you see. God is existence. And part of that existence, as Krishna is saying, is my eightfold body. But you don't want to get caught there. It's a marvelous thing. It's understandable why people can get caught there. I mean, air, earth, fire, water, and ether, forming objects, the senses, looking at them, enjoying them, and then the mind, the ordinary mind and the ordinary intellect and the ordinary ego getting all enamored of them. See, it's going to have to disenchant itself later. It got enchanted by all of that. It's called materialism or sensualism, eventually hedonism and war and violence and so forth, because then you covet it and you don't want it taken away and you want to own this part of it and someone else owns that part of it and you want to take it away from them. The thing goes on and on, you see. So you need to disenchant yourself from that. So he says, why don't you get enchanted with this intelligence, you see, that's shining inside and that's manufactured all that. That's the manufacture of this. And if you look at it personally or interpersonally, it's your body too has been formulated by that intelligence. That's a good key piece of information for people to know. The body, again, there's a good explanation for the quandary or the discussion, you see, is that my body was born in nature. But actually my body was born as a thought in my mind, and then it was produced in nature. See what a difference that is? So if you have that information that the mind mechanism can produce as many bodies as it wants to and does, then you know the secret of reincarnation. Now, do you know the secret of reincarnation? Quit producing bodies in ignorance and start producing them in intelligence, because that's where they came from. Lord Vashishta puts it very nicely in his Yoga Vashishta. He says that Kundalini Shakti loves to sport in this pure Astika body. But this pure Astika body made of 8 elements, the elements have to be pure. If they're not pure, if they've been used for impure means, then she won't come into the pure Astika body. And there you have most of the percentage of the population called worldly or ignorant or evil. See, I have no idea that there's a divine energy coursing through them. It wants to come up the spine. See, that wants to infuse everything with divine energy and turn everything divine. and cause you to live a dharmic life of love and compassion and service of others, service of God and mankind. They don't know anything about that because their eightfold body is impure. How is it impure? Well, yes, it's impure with passion and desire and all that, but let's put that aside for now because that's just immorality. What is really impure is that they think that it's the reality. That's what makes it impure. They're using it for the wrong purposes. They're using the eightfold body for the wrong purposes. It really is cut in the image of divinity, isn't it? Christ said it very nicely. You're cut in the image of God. So if you look at a man or a woman or a child, what to speak of a guru or a seer or a rishi, you should be looking at God standing there on two legs. That's how Vivekananda described it when he was here amongst us. I mean, he's still here amongst us, but when he was in his Piraska body, which was, by the way, very pure. Pure from inception, you see. He's perfect mind, clear mind, divine intention, produced a body, got into it from his perfect mind, you see, and dropped it in a perfect death, you see, a perfect renunciation, a perfect giving up, hands off, he used to say. So he said, the only way to prove to yourself that you're not matter is to leave matter alone. And that's what we do when we meditate. And that's what we do when we detach. And that's what we do when we renounce. And that's what we do when we work, if we're working in the right spirit. We leave it alone. To the work you have the right, not to the fruits. So if your senses are attached to the fruits, then it's impure senses. If they're not attached to fruits, and they're just doing the work meticulously, then the senses have a tendency to just pure, you see. They see God, they hear God, they taste God, they touch God, they feel God, they hear God. It's really very simple, but to put it into action is not so simple, especially in a day and age like this and in a world like this, where most people don't even know there's such a thing as God or a spiritual path, or have no inkling of the depth and profundity of the Dharmic teachings. So anyway, a very wonderful Triputi that Parvasta, our student here, has brought up for us to consider this morning at Satsang. Where's another question?
What are the spiritual representations of the Shiva Lingam and its milk offering ritual? What is it meant to reveal?
So the question, in case it wasn't heard clearly, is he's asking about the symbology or the symbolism behind the Shiva Lingam and the offering of sacred water or abhishekam, butter or milk or things that go with the puja to Shiva or to any deity, really. I mean, abhishekam is a very sacred ceremony where every temple in India, at least every so often, I think it has to be done at least in 12-year cycle, is covered with butter. In the more modern representations, I've seen it even drop from a helicopter. They used to just climb up on scaffolding and dunk the temple in ghee and so forth, but I've seen it now that they just get a helicopter up there and just dump it out. So they use all the modern mechanisms to do the abhishekam. Whatever the case may be, I don't think God gets offended by a helicopter, but the immersing of the Shiva Lingam, like the one on our altar here that's done at puja, is much like that too. It's just like a small temple. And of course it's sitting in a yoni. The yoni would be the female principle and the Shiva Lingam would be the male principle. And so there is Brahman amidst Prakriti, you might say. And the two are having a perfect union, and then you worship that feminine and masculine principle in the Shiva Lingam and in the yoni, and then offer flowers to it, sacred ash and kumkum and pouring of oblation over it to bathe it in the image. There are several symbolisms for that, depending on if the if the ritual is more tantric, or if it's more Vedic, there are ways of explaining it in different ways. The tantric tends to go towards deification of principles. So, what to speak of a Shiva Lingam? You could even have a image of Shiva there, or an image of baby Ram, or Ramlal, or something. And they're actually deifying that, and that's going to come alive for you. If your worship is intense enough and deep enough, then that will actually come alive for you and manifest in a form. So if you worship properly and with all the rites intact and all the offerings and all the actions pure again, then it tends to create that emanation of divinity, which could actually take a form. And interesting, you're talking about in the same session, you're talking about the Purastika body, the lower nature, and then the higher nature and the supreme nature. That's actually happening there also in that example, is that everything here got produced from the inner nature, and it's like an offering. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that the tree is like a puja going off all the time. See? Yeah. And sometimes it's not flowering, so the puja is not happening. See, flower offerings come, and all of a sudden the puja is happening. So you go there and you watch the puja in action. So he used to say everything, everywhere, at all times, there's a great puja going on. You just have to have the eyes to see it. And those eyes wouldn't necessarily be just, oh, look at the beauty of nature eyes. See, like in the Western way, we sort of have that kind of way of looking at things. But it's more like seeing the divine working through these manifestations, and feeling great devotion welling up in you for the source of all creation that's underlying it. You're using your discriminating power. Your eye is single, so you're not just saying, look at the pretty tree, because as Ramakrishna said, you see the same tree in Madras that you see in Calcutta. If you just look at trees, they're the same across the whole world, across the whole subcontinent. So if you're under the influence of a deification, divine puja everywhere, then you're not trying to look at trees and name them and appreciate their various qualities and everything. You're actually seeing the power in them, the animating power in them that's in the foundation of things. So you would water a tree, wouldn't you? Go out and water it and serve it. So in the same way, you're watering the Shiva Lingam. You see, with sacred water that's been made pure by Ganges water, and you're pouring it over there, and you're saying a mantra at the same time. So pure water, poured into pure water, becomes the same. And so this self poured into the self-Brahman becomes the same. So it's all a matter of using the outer form in a pure way to merge it into the next level of awareness. And as you do it, you go with it. See? That's why some pujas are very sterile, and some priests are very boring. See? You go into temples and so forth, you don't feel like there's much going on there. It just seems very by rote, by habit, sort of like our Christian churches that we've seen sometimes. Sometimes could be it has to do with how deeply the worshiper is into it. You see, the priest. So in that same way, you'll find that some temples and some priests and some ceremonies, of course, your mind also has to be in a certain state, has to be made ready, has to be pure too when you walk into the temple. But if all of those things are present in equal measure when you experience the puja, then you'll see the divine in everything. You'll see it shining off of everything. The koshas, the flowers, the food that's offered. Everything has a marvelous fluidity and depth to it. And you might not feel that way the next time you go to puja. It might be some of those elements are missing, you see. Something's not quite right, and so you don't feel the same way. But when everything is in that perfect state, then puja is just seeing God slowed down in vibration. Yeah. And you sit, you're very quiet, you slow down, the atmosphere gets quiet, all of a sudden everything is moving slow so you can actually see God. But we're always usually moving too fast, so we just overlook ritual, rite. We don't see any of the symbology behind it, therefore we don't feel any of the deep intensity, nor do we see the formless Brahman manifesting itself through form. There's a question on the computer from one of our students.
Jivan from Roseburg writes, as a householder, I find that I am at a disadvantage in being able to gain the wisdom needed to cognize the self. Gita, chapter 7, verse 18, singles out the wise man in favor. Is this a disadvantage for the householder? Can my practice of devotion still be a measurement of my desire to attain the truth?
I think everyone heard that question, but here we are back to chapter 7 of the Gita again. Everyone seems to be reading that about the same time. But the question in a nutshell is the difficulties of a householder as compared to a monk or a rishi or a seer or an ascetic who doesn't have that same responsibility and problem. Well, I was just speaking about that over the last few days and writing about it in emails because the question has come up too. And Sri Ramakrishna's attitude about it is that the householder life is the best way to realize God. And in fact, he used to say, and I paraphrase, if the monk doesn't realize God, then it's a great shame because he's renounced the world to do that. So when you've renounced the world, if you've done it properly, particularly, then you're already almost there on God's doorstep. It's just a matter of time before you'll see God face to face. But the householder can't renounce the world in the same way the monk does. The householder should learn to renounce inwardly, but not outwardly. You won't be able to renounce the word outwardly. So that might be a disadvantage, depending on the intensity of practice and devotion that the householder can bring to his discipline. But on the other hand, Sri Ramakrishna used to tell the story of the hunchback, you see, well, there's that story, but there's another story where a man is carrying a large weight on his back across the town, the city, and he runs into a marriage procession. And so everyone stops to look at the beautiful marriage procession, elephants and camels and everything else going by, and they're all looking at it, and so is he, but he's got this weight, you see, on his back. And so marriage procession passes and everyone goes their own way. They all enjoyed it, but he had to enjoy it bearing this extra weight. So he means the householder. And then he used the story of the hunchback too. He's got, he lives like everyone else, enjoys like everyone else, but he's got this thing on his back that he's always thinking of. So those are stories about the householder and how hard it is to live a spiritual life in the world from the householder perspective. But Sri Ramakrishna used to say also, and there's another beautiful story, the monk has a problem because he lives out in the world with no house, no walls. He could get hit by a stray bullet or a stray arrow, see. But the householder has his protection, wife, children, house, food, everything right there. So he should be able to live a divine life much easier than a monk. A monk can wander, but he's got this risk, you see, involved. And like I said, he should have already realized God just by renouncing the world. He should be practically at God's doorstep. But the householder has to work through all of these responsibilities and at the same time keep up a spiritual life. So you see, I think many of the Upanishads were written by householders. And they're the most revered of all scriptures in our tradition. The Upanishads are it. Vedanta means Upanishad. The Vedas, the last portion, is the Vedanta. And those are the Upanishads, 108 of them left to us now. There were probably many, many more before Vedavyas's time, but basically Vedavyas being the father of Vedanta, as he's affectionately termed, then all these Upanishads were there to note down, and so that we would remember them. So that is the Vedanta. So many of the great families then, the great grandsires, and were rishis, and they were householders too, and they raised families. You can see that if you live amidst the family, and you haven't retired from that completely, then you're going to have to develop a great strength. See? A great strength in areas that the monk might not be able to develop. The monk's strength is in other areas. Sri Ramakrishna, we have to also remember, said, a monk is like a great sun shining, but a householder is like a light inside a house. So this is all going to be dependent on the fact that whether or not the householder is sincere and determined, and whether the monk is sincere and determined. There are many monks who are letting down the ideal. Sri Sharda Devi, Holy Mother, mentioned them. Stay away from those kind, she said. They just pretend like they're spiritual, but they're actually doing nothing but wasting their time. And they maybe appear to be yogis. Their locks may be matted and long, reaching all the way to the ground, but they're lazy, and they don't do anything good for anyone. So there are monks who are mature and monks who are immature. Same with the householders. There are householders who are very much bound into matter and into the five senses and into what the family can bring them. Selfishness is basically still there. But then there are householders who are very heroic, and that brings in a tantric teaching that's very helpful in that way. Pasu is animalistic, virya is heroic, and daiva is divine. So I would say there are probably monks and householders both that fit those three types of categories. That is, an animalistic person is very sense-bound, very materialistic, and gives not a thought to spirituality or to God whatsoever. They still even may be devotees yet. They may still profess to love God, but their nature is still at an animalistic level. And then when they graduate to virya, heroic, that's when they begin to think not of themselves but of others. They begin to think of the best, highest good of other beings, and they put themselves last and others first. Heroic means, a being like Ramchandra or Hanuman and those kinds of beings that are, Krishna says, loka sangraha in the Gita. I'm always looking out for the highest good of all the lokas and all the beings in all the lokas. Lokas means realms inside of you, but these realms inside. So on all levels of being, the heroic being is a great step in spiritual evolution. And finally, the heroic being will turn into daiva. There's a class of being called divine beings, and that's where you find your rishis and seers and yogis, and I would say the divine being is both householder and monk. We have many examples of both in our tradition, and you can go on counting names off. You'd have to have 20 arms, like Sri Durga, to count all the great beings that are householders and at the same time illumined. So I'd say with that kind of complete look at things, we revere the monks, because, especially those who are exemplars, because they have successfully renounced the world, and they act as an example for all of us to do it, whether we will become monks or not. I myself took the best of both worlds, householder and monastic, and made them a part of my life, a part of my spiritual practice, and benefited greatly from being able to do that. So there's no reason why you can't draw the best from Vedanta, Tantra, Yoga, Samkhya, Buddhism, is there? Christianity, Islam too. Sri Ramakrishna did. In the same way, there's no reason why you can't draw the best from worker, merchant, monk, householder, outcast, all levels of being. There's something very good that each one of them teach you, and as long as your discrimination is intact and your sincerity is there and you're willing to intensify your practice to do away with karmas, then you'll be fine. Holy Mother said that. One of her quotes, she says, human being, today it is, tomorrow it is not. No one will go with you after death. Only karma will follow you after death, good and bad. But karma will be attenuated if you do japa and austerity with intensity. So that means in this lifetime. You don't want to wait until the disease comes and then add a medicine to try and do away with it. You want to keep the disease from coming in the first place. So you do austerities, you do your japa, and as soon as you get them from your guru and you set your foot on the path, you commit yourself and you keep it up. And that way you're keeping all sorts of karmas at bay that may have come at you if you didn't have those boons of Guru, Dharma, and Sangha. See? You don't know how many karmas you're destroying just by maintaining that kind of stance. So, as a householder then, I'd say to summate this rather long answer, I would say sadhana is the cutting edge. If you can keep up a spiritual discipline while you're a householder, then you've got the best of both worlds. If you don't keep up that practice as a householder, then you're, well, the Irish have one way of saying it, but you're in trouble. You're in trouble. You have found your way to Maya's door, not to God's door. So thank you for your question from Roseburg, Oregon. And our greetings and alohas to all of you there watching. Another question from Cindy, who's here with us.
I have a question about Brahman, and I'm interested to know where that word came from, and also how it is that word as opposed to the word God, because I've noticed that God seems to be a universal word that every religion uses. And Brahman seems to be specific to Vedanta. So I'm wondering, when and where to use which term, and then what are the nuances of Brahman versus what we refer to as God. And then I'm also interested in the Brahman caste, I guess it is, in India, having witnessed it up close.
Yes,
where that fits in.
Priest class, yes.
Yeah, where that fits in.
Yeah, there's usually a difference in spelling in the word. Brahman is with an A, and Brahmin caste is with an I. Brahmin is the priest class, Brahman. But that wasn't so true. In Buddha's time, he just called everyone the Brahman. So when he saw a man, he called the Brahman with an A. Yeah, so because they worshipped Brahman, then they just called them Brahman. But the priest class had its own way of, in the upper echelon of society, of having the responsibility of passing the spiritual teachings on down to the warrior caste, the royalty in the warrior caste, and then down to the merchants and down to the workers. So when the caste system was working well, it was the most marvelous system ever. Nowadays you hear so many people denigrating the caste system because it's fallen so low. But they forget, in its heyday, it was the best system the world ever saw. And it worked for thousands of years for those people. And we should probably examine that more than just tossing it off as if it's had its day. We should be bringing these back, not come to destroy the words of the prophets, have come to resurrect them, you see. So, they become old and outdated and worn out and so forth, and then they have to be resurrected, but they're not tossed away because that's a sterling system, a forecast system. So when it was really working, then the Brahmin priest class had its time, but the word Brahman itself, Sanskrit-wise, starts with that root bri, B-H-R, which means to expand. Now we know that Brahman, according to the Advaitas, doesn't expand. It's all pervasive, so it doesn't need to expand. So really the implication is the mind has to expand in order to know Brahman. It has to break down its barriers. So you have those beautiful chants like Apyayantu mamangani vak pranischakshu shrota matra balamindriyani cha sarvani. I mean, may all of my body experience health, may my life force flow unimpeded, may my mind expand in its capacity to know Brahman. So that's the idea. You see, this purastika body, if you want to go back to it again, this lower nature that he was talking about in chapter 7, may all of those things be used, purified and used as vehicles. Hopefully they never became impure. That's really the ideal, is that when you take on a body, then you keep those things pure. And then Kundalini loves to sport there. And that's why people are born in a realized condition all the time, because number one, their devotion to the Divine Mother is unstinting. And number two, they know the cosmic process. Knowledge has purified them, so they're born with pure knowledge. That's why give us pure love, pure knowledge, and pure devotion was my teacher's prayer. It was also the prayer of Sita, and it was also the prayer of Ramakrishna. So pure knowledge would be that in which a person is born and uses all the time to be born and to pass in bodies in a pure state. Well, Brahman is that eternally pure state. So may our mind expand in its capacity to know Brahman, Bri. And then we will become Brahman. That's one of the statements right out of the Upanishad. Those who know Brahman become Brahman. Those who love Brahman become Brahman. So that's like saying mankind is just God walking around on two legs, as we said earlier. Swami Vivekananda's quote.
So Brahman means God?
Brahman means God. Okay, back to that wordage. Yeah, I mean, we have Allah and we have Tathagata Garbha or Pragyaparam, Buddha called reality, and the Jewish and the Christians, Almighty Father and so forth. They had different names for this one nameless, formless reality. God is English word, rather laden with problems for most people. As soon as they hear the word, then of course they will get turned away from religion because they've heard it in so many ways that are fundamentalist or dualistic or problematic. So it's rather nice when you enter into Vedanta to find a word for God that isn't God, Brahman. Or if you become a Sufi, you find a word for God that isn't God, Allah. It just all of a sudden brings a whole new feeling for God back to you that you might have been resistant to. See, if you had have heard it put in the terms of your own language, the religion of your birth. See, many of us were born as Christians and Jews, but we're really not following Christianity and Judaism. So many people in America and Europe are like that. So we're looking for wisdom traditions. We're looking for something to restore our faith in Christianity and Judaism. Vedanta is that consummate way. other religions don't try and do that. See, but Vedanta one of its main boasts. Is since it's not a religion, it can restore your faith in any religion that you were born in or that you're choosing. It makes a Christian a better Christian, a Jew a better Jew, a Hindu a better Hindu, because Vedanta is something that's even not that well known to the Hindus, of all things. But the word Brahman is known to all Indians. They know that really well. And there again, if you have a sort of schism in your culture between reality and the priest class, which is quite often the case, Brahman and Brahmin in this case, then it's very nice to have this Vedanta that speaks of a non-dual side of your religion. Actually, religion and philosophy combined plus practice equals realization. That would be Advaita, non-dualism. And throw in a good measure of devotion and service too into that quotient, and you've got the full circle. So you come full circle. Come back into the world with love of Brahman that maybe wasn't there when you started off. However, it happens to the devotee. Some people are service-oriented, some people are devotional, some people are contemplative. They like meditation, and without any words attached to it. And some people are studious. So however those 4 yogas fit with the 4 types of temperaments, then that's the way the person will proceed. At the foundation of that, in the middle of it, and at the end is Brahman, the all-pervasive reality. Pure conscious awareness, timeless and deathless.
So when you use God or Brahman in your classes or presentation, are you making a distinction? Because I notice you switch back and forth.
No, I'm not really making any distinction.
Okay.
I'm with Americans and I'm with Hindus both,
right.
And my students are a cross-section of both, and from other countries too. So those who know English and who know a little Sanskrit, I have to speak to both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we should look to coalesce those 2 words. I mean, the same meaning as what I'm intending.
Okay.
Divine reality, or non-dual, or pure awareness.
Pure awareness.
Yeah.
Divine reality. So Brahman means to expand man. The last part is man, Brahman.
Bre, yeah, the Sanskrit root bre means to expand.
But the second part is man, so does it mean...
No, it's not the English word man.
Okay, that's what I mean. It means just to expand mind.
Yeah, I mean, aham, Brahman, is ego. So basically, ripe ego or unripe ego, but man taking on the form of, or God taking on the form of man, or man trying to seek God, that's Brahman. You wouldn't really need a word for it necessarily, but when you're at the practitioner level and you're studying the philosophy and so forth, then words are very helpful, very valuable. Again, if they become laden with baggage, from hundreds of years of fundamentalism or that kind of thing, then it's, like I said, very welcome to find another word in another language that can substitute for that word that gives people problems.
He's asking again a follow-up question from chapter 7, page 348 of the Gita that we usually use, Chidbhavananda's. He quotes, "Reflection depends upon faith." He says, having faith then, I have the true ability to reflect. Does this imply reflection on the self? And he quotes in there, reflection depends upon faith. That's a quote out of either the commentary or the verse.
All right, so Gita chapter 7 again, and this question about...
No, it's chapter... It's
Oh,
the
it's
last,
another
I
chapter.
think you must mean the last chapter.
Reflection depends upon faith. Well, depending on the commentary or the commentator of the sloka in question, nevertheless, it's still... I like the first way it was put there, best of all, is that because I have faith, I can reflect. So, if one is born with faith, which we were just speaking about, that is, if the purastika body and the manifestation, the karma and everything is kept pure, and you're just coming to sport in this world and to serve others, then that faith is intact. It's called shraddha. This is the word in Sanskrit, shraddha. And so, easy then to reflect upon one's true nature. But if you don't have faith, can you still reflect? Yes, I think of course you can. In fact, there are many people who start off, they must shravana first, hear the truth, before they can manana, reflect upon the truth. So, it's just that if you haven't heard the truth, then you're reflecting basically on matter, and you're reflecting on karma. That is, you're reflecting on your brooding, is what they say. Brooding is a good word for it. Brooding is rather a negative thing. It can be helpful, but most people's brooding is based out of loss, sense of loss, and ends up in a kind of depression. So a kind of reflection that's a higher type of brooding would be trying to work out problems in your mind. And we're probably all in knowledge and remembrance of having done that, or still doing it at times. We use our mind to try and solve problems in our mind, problems that are directly related to our life, not problems that are related necessarily to our spiritual life. So it's all from asatoma sadgamaya tamasoma jyotirgamaya. You always go from lower truth to higher truth. So when you start at lower truth, then you need to be reflecting upon problems that you will gain solutions for. And then once having done that, you can move on to higher truth. So faith in yourself comes by reflection. Like we chanted this morning before meditation, Shatagunam Vidyan Mananam Mananarapi, Nidijasam Lakshagunam Anantam Nirvikalpakam. Nirvikalpakam is of course the highest samadhi. But first you had to hear about the truth. So he says hearing about Brahman is good, but taking the teachings on Brahman is better. Mananam. You have to take the teachings and then reflect upon them. And that increases your faith. So your faith might be mere belief to start out. God is infinite and God is everywhere. This is beyond mere belief. God is the reality without a second. Or put Brahman in the place of the word God if you want. It is the reality without a second. So reflection is early on is lower truth, and then basically you come to faith through that. Mananam, rolling over the teachings inside of your head. There's a kind of reflection. So they also call that sukshma jnana. Jnana is meditation, and sukshma is subtle things in your mind. So instead of reflecting on the gross things, brooding, then you don't water those weeds anymore. You take the water away from the weeds and you water the flowers, and that's sukshma jnana. You begin thinking all the time about the teachings that your teacher is constantly telling you, or those slokas in the Gita that you're reading, that you're asking questions about right now. That's all a process of manana. And it leads to nidijasana, direct spiritual experience. So from lower truth to higher truth is basically hear the truth, shravana, then reflect on the truth, manana, and then realize the truth, nididhyasana. And then you bring it back again into your life, full circle. So that's the role of reflection. And if we understood your question correctly, then we hope we've answered it in a fashion, after a fashion. So here, let's end with a chant, speaking of slokas. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvavahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu, Ma Vidvishovahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.